Hi, it's Tiffany Lorraine with another episode of the Resilient Mother podcast. Today we start in January. It's a new year, 2024. Time to go get it, right? So we're going to start with resilience. Again, we're doing this year the Resilient Youth theme, and we're starting with resistance versus resilience. In other words, resilient awakening to the awareness inside ourselves of who we're really meant to be. And it's the place where we start discovering where resilience starts for each one of us. And so today I have Christine with me. She's an intuitive business coach to talk about this very thing. Christine, thank you for being here. Please tell us a little bit about you.
Hi, I'm so excited to be here. And I just love your smile, by the way. You have like the best energy.
Oh, thank you.
You make me excited. So thank you so much for having me. I'm an intuitive business coach, a transformation specialist, and I'm a mama of two. So I have a 6-year-old and a almost 2-year-old. And I really love the topic of awakening awareness and building resilience. I mean, I think that's been my last decade plus of kind of getting my ass handed to me quite a few times, many awakenings. And I've had to really learn, grit and resilience and how to expand myself, my capacity, my nervous system, my mindset in sort of mind, body, spirit. I've had to learn how to expand in order to become even more resilient through, as you know, trials and tribulations of being an entrepreneur, being a creative, being a visionary, being, I think, really a disruptor as well, because I don't tend to follow the traditional path. I'm very much like, I don't know if you follow human design, but I'm a manifester as well. So it's very visionary, and we're 9% of the population. So it's a very, we're a bit of a unique breed where we're meant to sort of disrupt and challenge things as well. So there's been a lot of learning throughout the years. So I'm super excited to be here and to talk about all things awakening and awareness and resilience. So
I'm excited to dive in because you have a breadth of information for us to share today and insight, and I'm excited to get into some of that. So to start, I would love to know your definition of resilience.
Ooh, so juicy. So resilience, when I feel into it, it's like the ability to meet whatever storms, challenges, contrast come in our lives with acceptance, ease, and grace.
I love that.
Yeah.
The two parts I really like that you said were the storm. I don't think of anyone who's described it that way before, but I really think that's true. There's actually a story about buffalo in Montana that when a storm comes, instead of running away from the storm, they run through it in order to get through it faster. And so that's what came to mind to me. And I think that's real resilience, is hitting whatever's coming your way, that storm or that challenge, head on so that you can get through it instead of trying to run away from it. And the other one that you said was the high contrast. Like, we have to experience the highs and the lows in life to have breath, to have depth, to expand our humanity. And so I love those two ways that you described it as well. And how did that happen for you? When was your awakening?
I've had many rock bottoms and awakenings. But the original one was back in 2014. It was actually 3 months after I got married. Usually that time is the time of, bliss and marital, this high. And for me, it was accompanied with a very wild honeymoon. I went to like Ibiza and Amsterdam and Italy and, going to DJs and all sorts of crazy stuff. And then 3 months later, we got back, and my husband, my new partner, had to go to rehab because he struggled with drug addiction. And so it was a really tough time. And during that time, there was so much like shame and embarrassment on my side. And I knew, looking back, there's a million red flags that I chose to ignore based on my childhood. And I've done a lot of work around that and how I was, a match for that type of relationship and dating chaotic partners. But so he had to go to basically like a couple month rehab stint. And at that time I was extremely angry and bitter and resentful, and really got served when I went. There was this week-long intensive that you can go to for partners or family members of addicts. And so I was extremely resistant because I was like, I was super self-righteous, and I don't want to spend a week in stupid Nanaimo and blah, 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 blah. I was all in my, like so mad. And I don't want to go. I want to go to Mexico. Like, this is stupid, blah, blah, blah. Take time off work. So anyways, I went there, and I remember we were all sitting down introducing ourselves, and they were like, okay, so we're going to dive in. This is like a location separate from where everyone else was. And they're like, okay, we're going to talk about you. And I just was like, oh, excuse me. And I raised my hand and I was like, oh, excuse me. Yeah, I think you're confused. Like, I actually am not the one with the problem. Like, I don't actually have the problem. And she goes, oh, sweetheart, you have the problem. And I was like, what? She goes, you're codependent. I was like, I'm sorry, what? Like, code what? Codependent. I had no idea any of it. Anyways, that week completely changed the trajectory of my life, because it was the first time I was like, I felt just broken down. It was the first time I'd done any type of self-development. They were like, we understood more about addiction. And, I had such a, image in my mind that addicts were people who were homeless and lived on the street. And, like, I don't know, I just had this like completely conditioned idea of what that was. And of course it's completely opposite, right? There was like lawyers, doctors and all, so there was so much I learned about that. And there was just so much I learned. It was like poking holes in the conditioning and this very strong identity that I built up until that point that was literally based on, that was really none of me. That was all conditioning and was all trauma and all sorts of, different pieces. But I had this sort of come to Jesus or God moment. I don't follow any practiced religion or anything like that, but I would say I'm definitely spiritual. And if you had said God or spirit or anything, my mom was very spiritual growing up and I hated it. Actually, she'd meditate and it's like, oh, just stop. And so I had this really interesting moment about day 3 where this like energy, I was like sort of half awake, half asleep. This energy came through my body, and I can only call it like a God energy, if you will. And it just like it was the first time I ever tapped into my intuition. It basically, that experience alone completely changed the trajectory of my life. And it sent me on like it's been 10 plus years, decade of personal development, tapping into intuition, building businesses from spirit, like all this, this completely different life. So that was sort of my first massive moment.
Yeah. But I feel like you have to be broken open sometimes to receive the truth. I'm all about resilient transformation so you can live your truth with God or wherever your higher source is. And what helped with that? Besides someone being really tough love, honest with you, that seems like that was the aha moment. Mm-hmm. But then you had to do the work. So what things helped you on that journey?
Oh, I think different things helped me during different phases, but some of the biggest, I worked with, I had the privilege of working with some coaches, enrolling in some, programs. But I found that there was journaling was a huge thing for me. Like, even they asked us like, reflection exercises, how do you take care of yourself? And at that point, that seemed completely foreign. Taking care of myself, like my whole life, I had built a life based on caretaking for other people and getting myself into very chaotic relationships and things like that. And so definitely practicing self-care. And for me, that looked like, getting to know myself, like who was I and what is actually not even really me. I was so attached to the, my personality or who I thought I was that, I really had no idea who I was. So journaling's been a huge one. Free writing, like sometimes I'll have prompts and sometimes I try to get in touch with myself. Like, how am I feeling today? Right? Like, what am I feeling right now? At that point, I had no connection to my feeling or, my sort of emotions or somatic I'd suppressed as a kid and eaten to self-soothe and had been bullied as a child. So I had a lot of, just dissociation, more so like a freeze response. And so
can you talk a little bit more on not knowing who you were? I experienced that myself. When I did my self-compassion class, I got to the end of it and we had to do total self-acceptance just as we were. Yeah. And I couldn't do it. And I realized, and I've shared this before, it was because I didn't know who I was. So how can you accept yourself fully if you don't even know who you are? And so it's interesting to hear someone else go through that process because that was rough. because I had this idea of how I flowed in the world, how I worked. I also was very much a people pleaser. I was almost a chameleon to anyone in any situation I was in. And so I had to go back and go, okay, when was I myself? Was I not myself? What is my truth? And it's quite a journey. So I'm interested to hear how that went for you along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, oh man, it was very painful, not knowing, like having this awareness and this awakening and really understanding, like I was like, I have no idea who I am. I remember one time my boyfriend said to me, he was so rude, but he was just like, you're so like boring, like you don't even like anything. And and at the time I was like, you know, and it wasn't the nicest thing to say, but there was some truth there that stung. So obviously there was some truth, there's something there. And yeah, I mean, it was really hard. Like you said, what I see is that when we stop and this is why most people don't stop, they continue to be busy, they distract themselves, they numb themselves out, is because the pain of not being who we authentically are is so deep. Not knowing what we're here to do, who are we, and what are we here to do? I think this is a massive question. And so that journey that I went through really had to reawaken, and I'm still going through it, and I'm still constantly learning more about myself. And the way I see it is like, we come out these brilliant, beautiful little souls. We are, you see children, they're just innocents. They're so magical. And then what I think, happens is that we just, over time, we layer on, if you imagine clothing, like we layer on layers and layers and layers of stuff that isn't ours. It's like, we're told, this is what's good, this is what's bad. These people are evil, these people are okay. This is how you do life. This is what's scary. Money is this. We were sort of programmed, like if our brain is a computer, to all these, very limited ideas and stories based on our parents' trauma and their parents' trauma and that lineage and that fear and scarcity. Like if you look at people's, in history past, it is not an empowering time. It's not a go out and thrive. It's a, let's just avoid pain and try not to lose too much, right? We're now in an era where we're seeing people coming out and saying, no, I'm not settling for like, okay, I want baseline. I want more, right? Like even when I coach clients, I'm coaching them through trauma and different things that are happening to really uncover who they actually are. And then sometimes we get to a point where they're just like, they're quote unquote good. They don't have the things bothering them. They don't have anxiety. They don't have, feel ridiculed with like just emotions. And so all of a sudden they're like, I'm like, okay, so now we're just getting started. They're like, what do you mean? I'm like, what do you want out of life? And it's almost a foreign idea that you can have amazing life.
That's what I want. What?
And craft this amazing life. We're the creators of our lives. So, I mean, I did a lot of things like shadow work and inner child work, and just really being pretty, like, it's this combination of loving and ruthless at the same time, like really open to being humbled consistently, because I think that the personality and the way the ego's formed, it's just like, whatever we learn from sort of 0-ish to 7, it's slightly debatable in the time frame there, but the way that the brain is formed is we're just, here's all these ideas, here's all this limited information, and we also pick up, we attune to the nervous systems of our caretakers and the people around us, and we learn from them. Like I watched my mother, she's amazing, but she had a lot of her own childhood trauma that was unresolved. She was overwhelmed, and our family was chaotic, and there's a lot of moving and stuff. So I've had to do a lot of unraveling even around that. And the things that I believe, I'm constantly questioning myself. I'll say something, it'll come out of my mouth, and I'll be like, hold on, is that actually true? Does that serve me? Is this helping me in any way? And having to constantly,
or was that even me? Or is that a past?
Exactly.
Someone else's voice that needs to be processed?
Exactly. And I think that, that is something that I think collectively we're all moving through. And I think the way to start even this process is start to get really curious around looking at your life. Like sometimes, I have this program, and I always say to people, I'm like, let's do a life inventory. Like where are you at? Like what's working, what's not working in your life? And looking at some of the pieces that aren't working and saying like, what is this about this that isn't working? Right? Like starting to tease apart sometimes the very, in Christmas Vacation, when Clark hands over the lights to his son and he's just like, here you go. And he's like, check every bulb. And he's like, this. It's like, that's kind of what it can feel like when we're starting to learn about ourselves. And I think it's just being really gentle with ourselves through that process. And having a very curious lens, because I think when we go into like shame or guilt, or sometimes I had that when I first started learning things, or seeing some of my shadow pieces, where I was very happy to go and tell people that I'm a business owner and I'm a Lululemon ambassador and I'm all these things. And I think we're very okay sharing some of these shiny parts of ourselves. But when there was parts of myself at that time years ago, I didn't want to share. Hey, when I get pissed, I yell at my kids. Hey, when I do this, I try to manipulate. Hey, when you know what I mean? Like, there was all these pieces that were not glamorous to admit, first of all. But I think that it's just understanding these are not us. We're sort of like in a trance or in like a VR headset navigating through life unconsciously. And it's not about what we did. I always say this to myself and my clients, because sometimes, we do inner child work and they're like, oh my God, I feel like I'm messing up my kids. And oh my God, they're having these awarenesses. And I always say, like, listen, we have to forgive ourselves for what we did in survival mode, because nervous trauma you're in survival mode. You're not in your like center. You're not in alignment. So forgiving oneself for what we did in a survival state, and just constantly, trying to do just a little bit better each day is helpful, I think.
Oh, amen to that. Like, the idea of being aligned with ourselves and just being aware, it can be scary. And some people can put a lot of shame or guilt on the fact that you're willing to share your story as well, is what I found, because you're willing to take the skeletons out of the closet because you want to live your truth and you're not ashamed to do it. And those of us that do the work as coaches, especially, we're willing to go there with you because we have to. You can't make progress without accepting every part of you. And part of forgiveness is bringing all of you with you. That doesn't mean you take the negative emotions with you. You take the lessons with you, though. And those will always carry with you. And there are some pain in life that will carry with you your whole life. And if you get stuck on shame or guilt with that pain that you carry, instead of seeing it as an empowerment of your empathy, of your compassion, it can have the opposite of being productive. And so those are the things I know that we work through to get people comfortable with their intuition. Because I think the other thing that happens is myself through, like, I'm used to ups and downs. I'm used to highs and lows. I'm just a very emotional person, hence attracting chaotic, not so healthy relationships, because they felt normal. They felt like the home I grew up in, where things just weren't stable. And so when I've had calm days, or when I finally started living my truth and I had like this calm, good day, it was foreign to me. It was uncomfortable to me because it wasn't the norm. And so there is going to be some discomfort. There's going to be some back and forth. Sometimes it feels like 3 steps forward, 2 steps back. But as long as you're making that progress, you're moving in the right direction. So don't get discouraged, is what I would say with that. And you're even talking with me as we were beginning, before we started recording, about all these times you've pivoted. And so now it seems like, because you decided to get that intuitive with yourself and grounded with yourself, not only are you helping others, but you have a better idea of when the time is to pivot and to move. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I created a business with just intuition and this, like, I want to help change the world. And that looked like, I think our purpose is always shifting and evolving. But at that time I've had to, I started up a brick and mortar fitness studio, and then I got pregnant a month after I opened the business. And, at the time, my partner and I were not doing great. And so we actually lived separately. And at the time I was living on government assistance. Like, I literally was like, I don't know if I can afford diapers. We had $25,000 in payroll and other things going out as a brand new startup. I was like drowning in overwhelm, and I had no idea how to run a business. My business partner left at the time as well. And so it was just like all these things happened, and my baby was premature. She came 6 weeks early as well. So I'm in the NICU for 3 weeks. So I'm like trying to pump, massive stress, new premature baby, on the phone, trying to like talk to instructors about what to do. And how did I get myself in this situation? Like, so there was that. There was like, moving through a year and a half later, I had chronic stress. I had adrenal fatigue. I had chronic stress. I started having panic attacks. I had no idea. I got shingles. I had pneumonia. It was like the year of insanity. Yeah, it was wild, but I was so out of alignment with who I was. And I was so functioning from this very hyper masculine, like, I have to. And there was such a deep fear of and anxiety of, oh my gosh, if this business fails, it means I'm a failure and I'm a total loser. Like, I had all these very unhelpful sort of belief systems that were underneath pushing me. And those were the voices that kept forcing me to overwork when I have a brand new baby and I'm trying to do all, you know what I mean? Like, that's the stuff I've had to do a lot of forgiveness around, is like not really being super present for my for my oldest. And, I was completely in survival mode and couldn't really function. But what I did during that time was actually, I booked a retreat for myself, and then I went, and then I, was on that retreat, and I heard like, you were going to run retreats. And I was like, I don't know how to run retreats. I'm literally in burnout. Like, how am I supposed to do this? And it was like, you're supposed to do a coaching program. All these like this very quiet, like intuitive voices started coming in, and none of it made sense. But I ended up enrolling. I ended up, following these nudges, and it was absolutely wild. But all of the physical sensations and symptoms literally just were completely gone. So it was like I had to essentially walk myself, I think, to the brink of chaos, and to the point where I actually was like, am I going to die? Because I feel like I'm going to die. Like, I can't function. I can't teach. I can't work. I can't do anything. But the universe is like, stop. Like, first it was a whisper, and then it turned into like megaphone. And then it was like, we have to literally, have a tree fall on her in order for this girl to stop. Like, she's out of control. I was so must do, must achieve. Like, I was so in this hustling phase. And finally I got smacked upside the head many times. And then ever since, I've had to learn to pivot and learn to follow those intuitive knowings and nudges, that internal GPS, if you will, that's, I think, inside every single one of us. It's usually just way too clouded with limiting stories and beliefs and unprocessed emotions. So I think when we do that deep internal work and we start to have awarenesses and we start to clear emotions that are living inside the body and the intuition drops and comes online. And then we have a lot more clarity and we can hear the nudges. And ever since then, I've been really leading my life and business through those intuitive nudges, even though it makes no logical sense. But it's sort of living more of a soul-led life and having the soul lead, because the soul's like, sister, I know exactly how to get you where you want to go for the best and highest good in the fastest way possible. And I'm like, I'm sorry, I can't hear you. I'm too busy trying to figure out life. And it's like, are you kidding me right now? Like, what do you know what I mean? It's just like, so I've had to pivot many times, and I've sold a business recently, and have a second child now, and all sorts of stuff, and divorce. Like, I'm navigating all these pieces, but through the work and through trusting the soul and learning how to pivot and not making the pivots mean anything. It's just knowing that sometimes life, we don't have the map, but there's something inside of us that's leading us that's way greater and has a much greater view. It's like them making decisions for the penthouse where you see everything versus like the basement where I'm trying to like make decisions from the basement with no view, no windows, So I think sometimes just, when we do that deep work, those voices and those nudges get much louder because there's not so much interference in our field.
And I think that comes differently for everyone, like how they hear or feel that. If you could describe how you feel when you're living in your truth and you're in alignment, and when you know you're off, could you describe some of those? I think it would help someone who's on this journey.
Absolutely. So for me, when I know I'm out of alignment, if you will, is when I'm feeling like overwhelmed, anxious, irritable, angry, like really, and none of those are bad or wrong. It's just that I know that there's something off when I'm in alignment and I'm making choices that are from solar and feeling, aligned with myself. It's when I feel joy and ease and just this like sense of trusting and freedom. And it's like a lot lighter in my system. And I've had to even do check-ins with self, when I'm making decisions or things like that. And this is a great process you can even try for yourself, is running that decision through your system. So like asking yourself like, okay, well, if I decide to do this, how does that feel for me? Like, what is that? If you have to make a choice or if you have to make a decision for yourself, I'll ask clients that sometimes. I'm like, okay, so let's run that situation number one through your system. What do you notice in your body? And getting them to just stop and close their eyes and drop into the body. The body tells us, they're like, oh, I feel stomach kind of cramping and I feel like some contraction. I'm like, okay, let's run situation number two. Run it through the body. They're like, it just feels kind of easy. I feel like, I can breathe easy. And I'm like, so there's your answer. You know what I mean? Like it's hilarious how complicated we love to make it. But I think that the sensations in our body tell us a lot about ourselves, right? Even I've had pain, like I've had, sometimes if you experience pain, I've actually asked, I've gotten to know my body. I used to hate my body. I grew up with a very volatile relationship with body. And so now if I have pains or aches or things like that, I'll actually just, sometimes rather than booking a chiropractor, booking the thing, I mean, I'm not saying I do those things as well sometimes, but sometimes I can tell I'm like, there is a part of me who just needs my attention. And I'll put my hand, on my shoulder or wherever I'm experiencing the pain. And I will ask, like, I'll just close my eyes and ask, like, what would you have me know? And it's like, you need to sit down. You're carrying too much. That isn't yours. You need to drop that. And it's wild, but I swear, as soon as I do that process, the body completely relaxes. It's like, we have all the answers. We have our systems constantly trying to speak to us. Again, we're just so busy distracting ourselves, trying to avoid, like what you said earlier about that whole, I think you said the buffalo, how when the storm comes, they run towards it. That's kind of how, and this is, and we're 2024, we're in this new year. I think that is really what I'm getting braver and more courageous and more resilient is in that it's actually looking at what I'm avoiding and I'm going straight towards it. Like, it used to be the thing that would run me. My fear would run me. I wouldn't want to look at things. I'd avoid things. I'd look at, things that were scary to me, having a conversation, leaving a marriage, leaving careers, like whatever is that like underlying, almost like low grade anxiety that you kind of know, you're like, I'm gonna have to face that at some point, but I'm just going to distract myself and pretend like I don't know it's there.
And maybe you're not in the rain of the storm, but eventually it's going to catch you that way. You can't avoid it. It's coming anyway.
You kind of know it's coming. And I think, yes, of course there's timing for everything, but I think the more courage we can access and just say, what would life be like if I just actually like turned straight around and met that thing, right? Like when I did deep shadow work, I remember one time just like having this visual where I was like this like monster. It was almost like my fear had turned into like this massive monster and it was chasing me. And I remember one time during the session, I just stopped and I like sort of again turned towards it and I just said, okay, fine. Like, you want to kill me? Take me. Like, it was, it was this very vivid image. And I was like, okay, fine. Like, I can't run anymore. And this, whatever, it almost looked like the Predator. It was like this creepy, visual. And the whole thing just dissolved. And it was like my inner child, like crying. Like, she just was like terrified, but she built up this big, scary monster to try to stop me from making changes in my life. Because at that time I was starting to step out as a coach and make videos and all my inner critics started coming out. And, I think in the new year, we all have these goals. We have these things we want to achieve. We have these new visions, but that fear, and there's so many things that stop us, like that's the thing. I love working with people, creatives and visionaries now, and people who, spiritual entrepreneurs and people who know they have gifts, but are having a hard time actualizing them, because it's like when we actually meet that fear and look at what's there, it's so common for us. It's unworthiness, fear of rejection, it's imposter syndrome, it's perfectionism, it's all these, as mothers as well, there's all these pieces and they're very common for all of us. But I think when we turn and we can actually meet what the fear is and actually just see it for what it is, that there's a part of us that's deeply trying to protect us from ever getting hurt. Like for me, going on video and recording videos for a course, I kept having all these things coming up blocking me because my inner child was like, remember when you were seen in grade 3 and remember what happened? You promised yourself you would never ever have the opportunity for people to ridicule you, tell you you're wrong, tell you you're ugly, whatever these things are. And so I kept trying to build and create things and I kept getting stopped or procrastination. And there was just this part of me who's like it wasn't an enemy. It's a part of me just trying to protect me. And so when I really got intimate with that part and was like, oh my gosh, I get that. Like that was really tough. And I'm reminding myself I'm a grown woman now and I have kids, I can do this. And, like that in itself builds resiliency because we're expanding our capacity to be with discomfort and to be with the storms and to, it actually, life gets really fun when you can actually sort of train yourself to walk towards the storm, or whatever the thing is in your life you're avoiding, because it unlocks hyper speed, like doors and people and projects, because your energy signature changes every time you process something or, move through trauma or something and you reintegrate these pieces, your whole energetic system starts to open up and expand, which draws in new people, places, things. And so it's kind of like a really fun, you're more in creation versus default mode.
I think everything that you're talking about hits safety.
Yeah.
We live in fear because we think we're protecting ourselves. We think we're safe. We're in that zone where we were comfortable, like I talked about earlier. So I think really turning and facing that storm, at least for me, was realizing I create my own safety. And I can create my own safety in the storm. I can create my own safety in the darkness. I can create my own safety even when I can't see. And it comes back to the body not lying too, of just, I know I know who I am. I'm this eternal being. I'm a spiritual being having a human experience. I'm not a human being having a spiritual experience. There's so much more to me if I allow it. And I think that's the other thing, is allowing the expansion. Yes, be aware of where you are so you can heal it, but also be aware that you're meant for more, that you are more, that you are capable of so much more than any of these limitations or opinions or expectations that were put on you from a young age. We all do. And all of it again comes back to, they want to keep us safe. But their path is not our path. All right, to be resilient is to find our path and to take it, and no apologies. Just hold on to it and go for the ride, whatever that storm may look like for us. And so I think that was the biggest aha for me with resilience, is I am the safety. I get to unlock that. And no one else can do it for me, nor should they.
100%. And when you're walking that path and you become, because when I was younger, I kept looking, and even just years ago, I was looking for partners. I was looking for money. I was looking for jobs. I was placing when this person or thing or circumstance is here. And I think we can fall into this trap of like, when that thing comes, the promotion, the thing, the time, oh, my kids, once they're in high school, once, it's always this thing in the distance. It's like, once that happens, I'll feel safe, or I'll feel better, or I'll feel whatever the thing is. And it's like, unfortunately, it doesn't work that way, because again, anytime, like you said so brilliantly, whenever we put anything outside of ourselves, our safety, our whatever it is, it's a very dangerous place, because people and places and circumstances are constantly changing. And depending on somebody's mood and their conditioning, like we're sort of saying, like, I'm giving over my power. And so I think when we can source safety through showing up for ourselves, through learning about the nervous system, and like checking where we are, when we can meet our fears, when we can do these we can start to build and expand the capacity for safety. I mean, that's when we're brilliant. That's when we come back online with the divine, if you will. Like, it's like it turns a switch on, and the body cues to the brain, the heart and the brain are now in coherence, and they say, like, hey, it cues it, like, it's time to create, we got to go. If you think about it, an animal in the wild, a lot of us are under chronic stress, and there's all these different things going on. And if we don't learn to take care of that, then, if an animal's in the wild and it's being chased by a tiger or something like that, and we're like, hey dear, you want to create, you want to paint with me? It'd be like, are you joking right now? Is this a joke? Because I'm getting hunted. It's not a time to create. It's not a time to expand and be like, do you want to do a manifesting course when we're in survival? You know what I mean? It's just like, what? So I think that, we as humans, because we are a little outdated, and because our systems are, we have a lot of extra stimulus, and, kids screaming, or a Zoom call, or somebody cuts us off in traffic, it's the same type of feeling in the body. It doesn't know the difference whether we're actually being chased. So I think when we bring it's safety online, our system, like you said, it opens up, it expands, and then there's like, we can create and we can flow. And that's like that's really being human, right? That's our soul is just in love with life when we're able to create and bring things into reality, turn thoughts into things, and start to really manifest,
And kids do that. They're born doing that intuitively. I was just listening to an article, and I may have mentioned this before on here a couple of times, but I just found this so brilliant, that your genius came with you when you were born. They were doing a study on what makes a genius, and they followed these children, and they were geniuses till they got into the school system, until they got other opinions put on them. And then they started getting discouraged because it came down to like 2% kept their genius when they were already born with it. So much of our own inner genius and that intuition, that truth, is actually just coming back fully to who we are, and being creative again, being excited about life, being excited about learning. And I think gratitude comes with that too. I think two things: love conquers fear. If we're doing things from love, and a pure love from ourself and knowing our truth, we can't go wrong. We can let go of whatever the outcome is. It's meant to be. And I also found out that gratitude cancels out anxiety. The two parts of our brain that carry love and fear and carry anxiety and gratitude, they cancel each other out. And that's why it's so important that we choose the positive, that we choose to go back to being grounded. We go back to feeling good, and we let that become the new comfortable in our life. And at first it may not feel, but that is meant to be your comfortable. You are meant to have joy. You're meant to have happiness now, not someday, right now. There's even a book on my shelf called Happiness Now. And it's exactly what you're talking about. What are you waiting for? It's yours. It's all yours right now in this moment. The only two things you have control of are you in this moment. So what are you going to choose? What do you really, really want? And if you want to be resilient, I think we gave you some great tools for that today. Christine, if they would like to come work with you, where do they find you?
Yeah, amazing. So I'm on Instagram. I'm just at Christine Banno. So CHRISTINE BANNO. You can come to my website, christinebanno.com. I also have a podcast called The Holy Fuck Moments. I hope I can swear, but that's my podcast. You can come listen. I interview guests, and I also do my own mini riff. So it's unedited and raw and very just like me. I sometimes will do 10 or 15 minute quick little whatever I'm moving through in that moment. But I love to interview people on their awakenings and how they sort of, this sounds funny, but how they kind of went from like hot mess to magic, like how they took their mess and it's sort of embracing the mess and how to turn it into magic and how to make it work for you. Because that's been my whole life. I take what I learn and what I'm moving through. I speak it, in a really open, honest way, and then others learn. And that's how, I think built, I'm sure as you as well, you've built the capacity to coach, because for me, I would see lots of coaching and therapists and all that, but I found that there's something about somebody when they haven't learned it in a book, when it's like a lived embodied experience and they move through it, there's something so magical about that. So, so that's what got me into coaching. So you can find me on the podcast. You can find me in my website or on Instagram. And
wonderful.
Yeah.
Any last thoughts about having a resilient new year?
Something that I really, and we could go into this on another episode perhaps, but like something that really landed for me is identity work. I'm not sure if you've, So somebody said, I think in the new year, we have a lot of positive, exciting, there's a lot of momentum. And what somebody said one time that really changed my trajectory of my life was, he said, you're never going to outperform your identity. And not to sound like a downer, because this is, it's exciting. It's 2024, but it's like, it's looking at what do you want to create, getting really clear and knowing that if you can even access those desires, number one, they're meant for you. You would not have those desires encoded in you if you weren't meant to actualize them, number one. Number two, it's looking at like what in my identity is either not in alignment with them, or where am I not operating? You know what I mean? Like, I think that identity work is so key, because they look at people. Why don't people make change? Why do they have set goals for themselves and they don't actualize them? And a lot of times it's because it doesn't align with their identity. And so, what I would say is, if whatever you want, this is just like a little tool or practice that I found really helpful, is looking at like, what's the identity of somebody who has those things, whether it's a healthy body, whether it's a loving relationship with a person, whether it's money, or whether it's kids. What does that person have? And, or how do you imagine that person would live or act if they have those things? They'd be relaxed, they'd be excited about life, they'd be happy, they'd have rituals, they would be, whatever the thing is. Just write down a list of all those things that person would have. And then looking at the current identity of what you believe in and see how much of that lines up. Because when you can start to live and act as if that top row of the traits that person has, and you can start to live by those and start to look at where those aren't in alignment with you now, the speed in which you will start to embody that new person or that new thing that you want in 2024 is going to collapse time. You're going to come into contact with that much faster. So anyway, that wasn't really answering your question, but
I love it, because that is, let's have a new identity in this new year. Let's find our resilient identity. I think that's very much about a resilient awakening and awareness. I think it fits very, very well. And it rings so true that, there's this fake it till you make it kind of mentality. And I just don't think that works as well as what you just said. Find somebody who's already done it and find out how they did it, and then decide to develop those traits. There's nothing wrong with evolving your truth. Once you found it, it's going to evolve. It's going to change. And I think the best example of that is Benjamin Franklin would pick a trait and do it for a time. He had like 12 key traits, and he'd work on one for like a year or something. I could be a little off on this. And then he'd go to the next one and the next one, and then he'd do them again, because that's what he decided his core values were and who he wanted to be. And so if you can find someone who's already there, absolutely strive for them and let them elevate you. Let them get you there. And we'll actually speak on that later this year on elevating and resiliently elevating your identity. Exactly that. And we'll also be talking about resilient intuition. So we've already kind of given you a preview of some other episodes coming this year. So stay tuned and stick around for those. And we'll see you another Tuesday at 6 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. Thank you for joining us, and have a happy and thriving, resilient new year in 2024.